What's up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome to the Bayou Blitz pregame show as we preview week number 2. I'm Brendan Boylan alongside my partner, founder of the Bayou Blitz, Bob Rose. Bob's down in New Orleans right now. It looks like I'm the only member of the Saints News crew that's not in New Orleans today. I guess I didn't get the invite to the party, huh?
Well, it's because you're always on your traveling road show, so we don't know where you're going to
That's
be,
true.
Brendan.
That's true.
You spent most of the week in the Central Time Zone, but I know you're crawling your way back home. But yeah, you're right. Our guy John Hendricks, it is as he always is, going to be at the Caesars Superdome this afternoon. Kyle Mosley is flying in. Kyle's racking up those frequent flyer miles, but he'll be flying in for the game. My wife Lauren and I, as you pointed out, we came in here on Friday afternoon. We will be leaving on Tuesday morning. But we will be at the game today, Who Dat Nation. So make sure you come and see us. We are sitting around in section 537. So I hope to actually see some of you when I'm in town today. But like you said, Brendan, this is as big as it gets for an early season showdown.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll go ahead and give you guys the latest on Alvin Kamara. As of about 9 hours ago, Adam Schefter reporting that he's not expected to play. We can confirm with our own sources, John Hendricks and some others, that it is he's not expected to give it a go. And per John Hendricks, quote, shocked if he suits up today. So not looking like the Saints are going to have Alvin Kamara as he's battling a rib injury. Latavius Murray was signed to the practice squad. However, the elevation did not happen yesterday. So unlikely that Latavius is going to suit up for New Orleans and his comeback tour with the Saints. So we're looking at some sort of partnership of Mark Ingram, Tony Jones Jr., and Bob threw this out earlier in our conversations privately that Taysom Hill's probably going to get some looks at running back, fullback, H-back, football player that Taysom Hill is. So, Bob, how does that affect what the Saints are trying to do against a Buccaneers team that really came out and dominated Dallas a week ago?
Brendan, I think that it affects it a lot with Kamara being out or most likely out. But I believe that it affects the passing game more so than the running game. As we've all written and talked about all week long, it is extremely important for both of these offenses to establish some sort of running game and cement a balance against a very formidable defense on both sides. Obviously Tampa Bay is going to come at New Orleans with Leonard Fournette, but the Saints' lead back has obviously been Alvin Kamara over the last few years. But Kamara, for my money, Kamara is the best receiving back in the NFL, mainly because he's not just a threat out of the backfield. He can line up wide. He can line up out of the slot. He's a killer on those wheel routes or halfback option routes. The absence of Kamara is going to leave the Saints offense much less multifaceted. But that's why I expect Taysom Hill to get a lot more reps out of the backfield. Mark Ingram is going to be the starting back, assuming Kamara can't go. Like you just said, we're going to see a lot more reps from Tony Jones Jr. One or more of those guys have to establish some sort of threat. I don't see the Saints, rushing for 180 or 200 yards against the Tampa Bay offense. But in order to keep pressure off Jameis Winston and open up options in the passing game, not to mention the play action opportunities, you need to establish a running threat. Kamara's prospective one-on-one matchup with Tampa linebackers Levante David and Devin White, that's not going to happen. But as we've seen from many times from Mark Ingram over the years, he is still a solid option on check down routes, screen passes, things like that. So I would not be surprising at all to see Ingram, catch 3 or 4 balls in that capacity. Again, just to stave off and slow down that Tampa Bay pass rush a little bit.
Well, that pass rush is what gave Dallas so many problems a week ago. Dallas was the only team in the NFL not to reach the end zone in week 1, and a lot of that had to do with a guy named Shaq Barrett. He's also fully responsible for Dak Prescott missing somewhere near about estimated 2 months. People forget just a couple years ago, Shaq Barrett led the league in sacks.
Right.
He's been an absolute monster of a threat for Tampa Bay. And we talked about earlier in the week on the Bayou Blitz on Wednesday that this is a team that's loaded with talent, particularly on the defensive line. They're super speedy. They're super athletic across the defense. You talked about the running game, but let's talk a little bit about the passing game. When you have guys like White in the middle, you have guys like Levante David, maybe the best 1-2 linebacking pairing in the NFL right now. How do those guys affect what you want to do with guys like Mark Ingram, guys like Taysom Hill, and then guys at the tight end spot, which, the Saints need a little bit more production out of?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And and as our friend Mike Detillier always says, you can never have enough pass rushers for a defensive team. We talk about Shaq Barrett a lot, and rightfully so. But Joe Tryon, their number one draft choice last year, he is developing into a very solid pass rusher on the other edge. So, Ryan Ramczyk and James Hurst. And listen, I'm not real worried about Ramczyk. We've seen him shut down the league's best pass rushers as a matter of routine. But Ryan Ramczyk and James Hurst have to contain Tryon and especially Shaq Barrett at the edges. And they have to do so one-on-one more often than not. If they're able to do so, then New Orleans can get a little bit creative with their interior pass protection schemes, because that's where we saw the Saints struggle against the Falcons last year. That's where Tampa Bay, in the first matchup between these teams last year in Week 8 when Jameis Winston got hurt, Tampa Bay came out from the opening gun, and their strategy was to blitz and bring extra interior rushers in Jameis Winston's face. Since that's where Atlanta had success last week, that's where we should expect Tampa Bay to attack most often today. So it's going to be up to Eric McCoy, Andrews Pete, Cesar Ruiz, to block somebody. I'm not going to be overly schematic. Just block somebody. But the ability of Ramczyk and Hurst to handle those Tampa Bay edge rushers, mostly in one-on-one situations, is going to help out tremendously. But you mentioned the tight ends, specifically Adam Troutman, since he's the best blocker of the bunch. Expect to see Troutman stay in on some max protect schemes today. Probably more often than not on the side of James Hurst. So maybe Troutman can take on the Tampa edge rusher that lines up at that spot and allow Hurst to pinch inside to help out Andrews Pete, who would be the blocker, the guard on that side, to set up that interior pass pocket. We mentioned Mark Ingram as a potential threat on screens, and while that remains true, Ingram is also a fantastic blocker on blitz pickups. And we mentioned it as a key to the halftime show during the Falcons game last week. Look for Ingram to get more snaps in the second half as a pass blocker. We saw that. We saw them be effective with that, and I can see them using that in the same way today. I picture, even as I'm speaking about it, I picture Ingram staying in, chipping on an inside blitzer, and then releasing for a late screen. I could see that being very, very effective. And if that strategy is effective and picking up some key first downs or some big gains, that right there is what's going to slow Tampa Bay bringing extra rushers, especially over the inside guard positions.
Well, I highlighted Mark Ingram in our X Factors piece this morning as my offensive X Factor for what you just said in slowing down the Buccaneers pass rush, whether that is effectively running the ball between the tackles, whether it's something like you said in being effective in the screen game. That's going to be crucial for the Saints today. Let's see what our friend Sean had to say. Picked up Taysom Hill in fantasy, huge sleeper at the tight end position for fantasy. It's an interesting one. It really depends what you have at tight end. If you have a mid-level tight end, a guy in the middle of the pack, and you can pick up Taysom Hill, it's interesting. But do keep in mind, Taysom, despite his big day in week 1, only had 5 total touches.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to be going on quality over quantity, which if you're in PPR leagues is a little difficult because you definitely want to get the touches. If Taysom doesn't have the big run or he doesn't have the touchdown, think about how many points he would have had last week. So just be careful with Taysom Hill in fantasy moving forward. confused they can't sign Murray. So essentially, yes, they got Murray on the practice squad. However, elevations had to happen, I believe, yesterday.
Yep.
And they did elevate Christian Ringo again, the defensive tackle. Murray was not a part of those elevations. And honestly, I'm not too surprised. The fact that Murray hasn't been with the Saints in quite a while. He hasn't been he wasn't on a roster during training camp. You got to get him reacclimated to everything. So maybe a guy to look for in the future, but not this week. Let's talk about this, Bob. The New Orleans receivers had a really good outing in week number 1. A lot of people surprised with Jarvis Landry and what he was able to do. And I highlighted Landry as an interesting player going into 2022, not just in fantasy, but just in general, because we didn't really know what Jarvis Landry's role was going to be in the offense. Was he going to be a true number 2? Was he going to be a slot? Obviously, Mike Thomas, when healthy, is your number 1 guy. But it looked like Landry really established himself as a number 2 wide receiver for New Orleans as Chris Olave continues to develop into his NFL game. What do you expect out of Jarvis Landry in a matchup like this, where those short and intermediate routes could be crucial in what I see being a defensive battle?
Yeah, and the short and intermediate routes are going to be incredibly crucial, especially without Alvin Kamara, because he was your short and intermediate threat. He and Mike Thomas, so that increases the importance of a guy like Jarvis Landry, a good route runner, a good short yardage to middle yardage receiver, a good chain mover, and he was effective in all those roles last week against Atlanta. Like you pointed out, everybody knows about Michael Thomas. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers sure as heck know about Michael Thomas. They haven't had a lot of experience or a lot of film, at least against their defense, on Jarvis Landry. And we saw Jameis Winston and Jarvis Landry work up a good chemistry in the early weeks of preseason. If there's a security blanket in the Saints offense for Jameis Winston, I would actually suggest that it's Jarvis Landry more so than Michael Thomas. Very, very, very close. And Mike is always going to be the alpha of this receiving core as long as he's on the field. But with Jarvis Landry, for the first time since 2017, the second year of Michael Thomas's career, the Saints have a bona fide secondary complementary threat at wideout to go along with can't guard Mike. And then you add Chris Olave into the mix. He's not only a guy that will take the top off of defense, but he's an extremely precise route runner too. That gives the Saints 3 bona fide options to attack this Tampa Bay secondary.
Absolutely right. And I did want to highlight, because you said having a guy across from, or rather side by side with Michael Thomas over the years, the Saints really lacking that. Emmanuel Sanders called it a career, so congrats to Emmanuel, even though it was 1 year in New Orleans. He had a very crucial part of that season with Mike missing a lot of time. So congrats on the career for Emmanuel Sanders. Flipping into the defensive side, I mean, we could talk Jameis Winston at being a quote-unquote revenge game, but I think we'll save that for the end. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, last week you did a really good job highlighting that for Demario Davis, there was no need to give him any slack for that game, because having a quarterback like Mariota that didn't fit Davis and racking up the numbers, we instead saw Pete Warner rack up those numbers, as that type of style really fit his game more. In a game like this, you have a guy like Tom Brady versus Demario Davis, 2 of the best minds in football. It's definitely going to be a heck of a matchup between those 2, but we should definitely expect Demario Davis to get back on track, quote unquote, this week in terms of statistics. This one fits him a lot better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about the juicy matchup that we're going to get deprived of today between Alvin Kamara against the Tampa Bay inside linebackers. Leonard Fournette versus Demario Davis is just as important to the outcome of this game and going to be just as entertaining. Yes, there's going to be the mental chess match between Demario and Tom Brady going on, for pre-snap reads and pre-snap adjustments. But Leonard Fournette is not only the Buccaneers' leading rusher, but he's also a fantastic receiver out of the backfield. Not like Kamara. Leonard Fournette will attack you as a pass catcher in a little bit more of a traditional way. But the guy most responsible for trying to contain big game Lenny out of the backfield is going to be Demario Davis, more so than Pete Werner, in my opinion. Demario is going to have to shadow Fournette coming out of the backfield. We should expect some bone-jarring collisions at the point of attack between number 7 for the Bucs and number 56 for the Saints. And not to mention, like you pointed out, Demario is the captain, the quarterback of that entire defense. So, as he and Tom Brady are matching wit for wit, it's Demario's responsibility to read what the Tampa Bay offense is trying to do against the New Orleans defense and put his players in the proper position to make plays.
Well, there's one matchup that most Saints fans, most Bucs fans have circled, and it's going to come between Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Evans. That has been one of the nastiest rivalries within the rivalry of the last 5 years. I'm going to be honest. I have Mike Evans rather on my fantasy team. I'm benching him this week just because of the history.
Wow.
Regardless of the projections, the history says that Mike Evans is not going to have a great outing. And you look at some of those zeros across the board over the years. What type of performance do you expect out of Marshawn Lattimore, who didn't struggle at all last week, only allowing 1 reception for 6 yards between his coverages of Drake London and Kyle Pitts? Do you expect to see Lattimore towards that Pro Bowl / All-Pro type of level against his biggest rival?
Yeah, I really do, because Marshawn Lattimore really gets up for matchups against the league's marquee receivers. And as you pointed out, there is a legitimate dislike between Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore. So much so to the point when Mike Evans had been, and this has happened multiple interviews that I have seen and heard, when Mike Evans is asked about Lattimore's success against him, he won't even give Marshawn any credit whatsoever. He'll begrudgingly say, yeah, he's a good cornerback, but it's the Saints defense that shuts me down, not Marshawn Lattimore. Click on the film, Mr. Evans. It is a team effort. It's always a team effort, but it's number 23 in the black and gold that's making your life a living nightmare. And Marshawn, in 10 meetings against Lattimore, has held him to 2 or less catches 5 times, has held him to just 40% completion percentage when Mike is targeted, and he's averaged, or he's had only 8 receptions for 90 yards in the last 6 meetings. Marshawn gets up for this, and I expect him to be geeked up. Having said that, without Chris Godwin in the lineup for Tampa Bay, with Julio Jones being a game-time decision, although I do believe Jones will play, and Russell Gage being slowed by his own hamstring, Mike Evans is the most accomplished target in Tom Brady's arsenal. They are going to try to move Evans around to get him matched up against someone else. And remember, the Saints themselves are going to be without Paulson Adebo, and Bradley Roby struggled just a little bit last week. So we can expect Evans to try to move around. I expect Lattimore to shadow Evans whenever possible and to hold up well in coverage, as he always does. But that's going to be a very interesting chess match between Byron Leftwich and Tom Brady, and Demario Davis and Dennis Allen.
I'm glad you brought up Godwin missing the game. Glad you brought up that Julio is a true game-time decision. And even Russell Gage's injuries, because Russell Gage has had some good outings against New Orleans when he was with the Atlanta Falcons.
Mm-hmm.
Do you expect the Saints defense, particularly the safeties, to creep over and give Lattimore help on that side with Mike Evans, considering he may be the only true veteran threat of that receiving corps today?
We'll see him roll a little bit of coverage, but more often than not, Lattimore has had the success he's had against Evans in true one-on-one, like old school man-to-man coverage. And while it is a gamble, especially in this day and age of flag-happy referees, and we always know some extra flags come out when you're playing TB12, no matter what uniform he's wearing. But yeah, I do expect the Saints to give a little bit of deep help. But more often than not, you're going to want to protect Bradley Roby. You're going to want to protect your slot corner, be it Justin Evans or Alontae Taylor if he sees any action today. So that's where I expect the help to come from the Saints secondary more often than not. We're not going to see Lattimore and Evans on a complete island for a lot of snaps, but we are going to see it.
Understood. Well, this is a Saints defense that didn't record a sack in week one, which is surprising to a lot of people. We talked about Mariota and how he was being used, and you have to credit Arthur Smith for the Falcons of really playing to Mariota's strengths and having to almost reconstruct that offense from the Matt Ryan era. And I thought they did a really good job of playing towards more of an Oregon style, like what Mariota played in college. Now, this is a completely different matchup. You have one of the most non-mobile quarterbacks in the league, and that's nothing against Tom Brady. But when you're 45 years old and you haven't really been mobile your whole career, I don't expect you to magically put on some cleats and have Mike Vick speed all of a sudden. So this is a matchup where you have guys like Marcus Davenport and Cameron Jordan, who might be a little frustrated after last week and not being able to hit the quarterback a whole lot. Having a golden opportunity with a guy who's more than likely going to stay in the pocket. How crucial is it for New Orleans to get some early pressure on Tom Brady? That's what's thrown him off over the years, and that's why the Saints defense has been so successful against Tom. Remember, 4-0 since he's joined Tampa Bay. They have yet to lose to Tampa Bay in the regular season. How crucial is it? One, and two, out of the defensive line, which player do you expect to have the biggest impact today?
Brendan, if the Saints don't pressure Brady early and often throughout the game, they lose. It's really that simple. In the 4 regular season wins that they've had over Brady, they've held Tampa Bay without a touchdown 2 times. They've intercepted Brady 8 times, forced 1 fumble against just 6 touchdown passes. They've sacked him 16 times, hit him 26 times, pressured him 39 times. So, yeah, it's truthfully that's it. The Saints don't pressure Brady and don't fluster him. They lose. With the injuries that Tampa Bay has along their offensive line, I am looking at 2 defensive linemen in particular. The Bucs are riddled with injuries along their interior. Their center is out. They're starting 1 rookie, although he's a good one, Luke Gadecki. They're starting 1 rookie at 1 guard spot and a 3rd stringer at another guard spot. So you got to expect some pressure and some disruption from David Onyemata. And like you pointed out, the Saints defensive line has been disruptive against Brady, particularly their defensive tackles. And it's no secret that that's the key to beating Tom Brady. You get pressure in his face, you disrupt his timing, and you rough him up a little bit, and he will get frustrated. So Onyemata has got to make a difference in this game. And the other one is Cam Jordan. For as much as we make about Cam's personal statistics against the Falcons, his career statistics against the Buccaneers is pretty darn solid too. He's at 17 sacks in 21 career games against them, 7.5 sacks in his last 8 appearances against Tampa Bay, including that monster performance in Tampa when the Saints won 9-0 last year. Cam will more often than not be lined up along the Buccaneers' left side of their offensive line, where their left tackle, Donovan Smith, who Cam has dominated throughout their respective careers. Donovan Smith is probably not going to play today because of an elbow injury. So that leaves the Buccaneers down 3 offensive linemen from their projected starting 5. The Saints defensive line needs to make a difference, not only in pressuring Brady, and like I said, I'm looking specifically at Cam and David Onyemata, but Marcus Davenport can't be the invisible man like he was last week either. He has got to make some plays on the other side. This defensive line, along with Demario Davis, has got to shut down the Buccaneers' running game too, make them one-dimensional, and then proceed to crush that dimension.
I would also expect to see plenty of stunts ran by the Saints defensive line, bring a guy like Cameron Jordan inside, a guy like Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner, etc. And then delayed blitzes have really frustrated Tom Brady over the years. So like you mentioned, look for guys like Demario Davis on some delayed blitzes to bring some pressure right into Brady's face. He's not a guy that's going to really escape it and roll out, or at least have the ability and the speed to do so. So those are some of the keys in the game, Bob. With our last 5 minutes, let's talk about some X factors for both sides. Obviously, the Saints offense going to be without Alvin Kamara. Are you looking to a guy like Deontay Hardy to maybe be a surprise in the Saints offense to be really productive today, or who are you looking towards?
The guy at the top of my list is Chris Olave. First of all, Michael Thomas has feasted on Tampa Bay coverage throughout his career when he's healthy. So I do think that Mike Thomas is going to get some numbers. I think Jarvis Landry is going to get some targets too. But Tampa Bay's secondary has had loads of problems against teams with deeper receiving units. The Saints didn't have the horses, didn't have the weapons to take advantage of that weakness over the last couple of years. They do now. Tampa Bay knows darn well what Mike Thomas can do to them. Jarvis Landry is an established Pro Bowl veteran, so they know him. Chris Olave is the unknown factor for the Tampa Bay secondary. So I think that Olave is going to be the one potentially to make a few big plays this afternoon. However, I also expect a guy like either Deontay or Marquez Callaway is my deep sleeper. One of those two, and probably Hardy, because he could beat you in so many ways, lined up in an offensive formation. Without Kamara, they're going to need a guy to be kind of that multifaceted weapon, maybe on end arounds, something like that. Now, Tampa Bay's defense is extremely fast and athletic, but they're also aggressive. So you could take advantage of some of that aggression with misdirection with a guy like Deontay Hardy. So it would not surprise me at all. But yeah, my number one X factor offensively for the Saints is going to be Chris Olave.
Yeah, I'm glad you said those things about Hardy, because the first thing that came to my mind when we heard the Alvin Kamara news was, could a guy like Hardy be used like Deebo Samuel?
Yeah.
And coming out of the backfield and just causing some havoc and confusion. You want to go back in Saints history, and a guy that is, I don't know how fans feel. I do know how fans feel about him, but I don't really want to say how fans feel about him because it's a PG show. But a guy like Tommy Lee Lewis was also used like that in the past as well, where you saw him line up in the backfield. So you already have some of those things established in playbooks from over the years. Do you dust off an old one and see what you can do with Hardy today? I think that's an interesting prospect. I already highlighted, I think the running game is going to be huge. And without Kamara, I'm looking towards a guy like Tony Jones to come up and not carry the ball 10 times, but in those 5 to maybe 7 touches that Tony Jones gets, what can he do with it? Remember, week 1 against Green Bay a season ago, he had something like 7 carries, 8 carries for 50 yards. Can he be productive like that in his yards per carry? He had a great preseason a year ago as well. I'm looking towards a guy like that. Now, defensively, Bob, we highlighted a ton of guys. So the one that I'm going to highlight is Justin Evans, who was getting primarily the nickel corner snaps in week 1, which is something I was a little surprised to see. I figured it'd be Alontae Taylor. But Evans had an outstanding preseason. A lot of people, myself and you included, rooting for the guy coming off of 2 terrible injuries, gets a chance to start at nickel today for New Orleans against the team that drafted him. This receiving corps for Tampa Bay may not be deep today, but like you said, Mike Evans hasn't had a lot of success against Lattimore in New Orleans. They're going to have to look different directions. Can Justin Evans come up and make a big play against his former team? That's the guy I'm watching today and rooting for today. What about
the guys I'm looking for? I'm along those same avenue. Look for PJ Williams too. PJ only got like 15 or 16 snaps against the Falcons, but PJ made tons of plays in both victories against Tampa Bay last week. But I'm looking at the 2 safety spots, the 2 starting safeties, Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May. Now, both of them, especially May, made some plays down the stretch against the Falcons yesterday. But the communication continues to be a worry for me in that Saints secondary. First and foremost, like we said just a few minutes ago, the Saints need to disrupt the timing of Tom Brady. If they don't, they lose. I don't care what kind of secondary you have. But Brady is still going to be able to Brady is still going to have his opportunities. And there's no better quarterback in the NFL today capable of taking advantage of potential miscommunications or coverage breakdowns than Tom Brady. So it's going to be up to Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu to prove that they can not be fooled by TB12's eyes or coverage manipulation and ultimately show that they can make plays. We saw Malcolm Jenkins, Marcus Williams do it. We obviously saw Chauncey Gardner-Johnson do it. Now step in the 3 X factors that you and I just highlighted: Justin Evans, Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu. They're all new faces in the Saints defense. Brady knows that. He's going to test them. They need to stand up to that test.
Well, it looks like we're on the same page. That actually happens more times than not. Wonder why. But let's talk, before we go, let's talk predictions for the game. I think you and I have beat a dead horse in articles this week on the
Mhm.
Bayou Blitz and now on the pregame show, how important it is to get in the face of Tom Brady, disrupt him. That's going to be the key to success. We didn't get to talk a whole lot about the Jameis Winston revenge game, if you will. I think his performance is going to be key. But like I said in my fantasy article this week, I'm sitting Jameis Winston this week because I think he's going to be more of a game manager than a gunslinger in a game like this. He's going to, if he leads New Orleans to victory, it's going to be because he played smart, didn't turn the ball over, and did
Mhm.
just enough. He's not going to come out and sling the ball for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. But nonetheless, I'm looking at New Orleans to win a really, really tight game, and it might come down to the right foot of Will Lutz yet again. I'm going to take the Saints 20-17 in this game
Ooh.
and continue their dominance over Tom Brady.
You and I are kind of on the same wavelength. I look for more from Jameis Winston than just to be a game manager, especially with Alvin Kamara out. Now, Jameis knows and the Saints know that he doesn't have to throw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns to win this game. But Jameis is going to be geeked to play his former team. He needs to play. The trick is he needs to play within himself early on. We saw those jitters and the timing issues with the passing game last week against Atlanta. But I believe going back to last year's Week 8 matchup against Tampa Bay, the one that New Orleans won in the Dome, the one where Jameis Winston went down, I think Winston was on his way to a big ball game. He misfired some plays early. Again, those were jitters. And Tampa Bay came at him with a lot of blitzes then, are going to come at him with a lot of blitzes now today. But we saw how clutch Jameis Winston can be. And I think that this young man is playing with a chip on his shoulder today if the Saints can protect him. And that's a big if. That's one of the biggest keys to the ball game. If they could give him just a little bit time to survey the field. I don't think Tampa Bay's secondary is as good as a lot of people think, especially with the fact that they struggle against deeper receiving core. So I think Jameis Winston is going to have a big afternoon on the fringe of about 300 yards and 3, maybe even 4 scores, be it with his legs or his arm. The key with Jameis Winston, as always, is can he avoid the turnover? Can he get rid of the ball and avoid big-time sacks and big-time situations? I think he will. Defensively, the Saints are going to be tested early and often by Leonard Fournette. They're going to have to answer the bell after giving up 201 yards, and that still boggles my mind, to the Atlanta Falcons last week. But I think that this is a Saints defense. It's angry at themselves, and believing that they have something to prove. So I think we're going to see a much more motivated defensive squad than we did last week. They know what they can do against Brady. They know what they need to do against Brady to help out that secondary. As always, there's just too much star power on both sides of the football to predict a lopsided win by either team. We have seen it happen, but to predict it, I mean, you got to be either Nostradamus or have extreme hatred for one team or the other. So I expect a close ball game too, down to the fourth quarter. It's going to be a 1-score game, but instead of Will Lutz winning it at the buzzer, I think the Saints defense will make a play late in the game. After Jameis Winston made some plays through the middle portions of the game once he settles down. I'm going to go with the Saints 27-24.
Another tight one. So you're predicting something similar to last year at the Superdome with the defense coming up big at the end of the game. Well, guys, that's our pregame show. No halftime show today as Bob is in New Orleans with the rest of the crew. So we will see you next Wednesday with some recap of this and looking forward to the Saints and the Panthers. Talk about a brutal stretch of important games in the NFC South early in the year. We'll see if the Saints can start 2-0 on the year and 2-0 in the NFC South. Bob, you and Lauren have a great time down there, and we will chat with you soon. Real quick, for the people that don't, where can they follow you online?
No, I'm not going to do it today, Bayou Blitz, folks.
Mm.
I'm in New Orleans. You have your chance to see me. I want pictures with fans. My wife and I want pictures with fans. We're sitting in 537. You can follow me if you already follow me on Facebook, Bob Rose, or over on Twitter at at Bobby R2613. Send me messages. I told you we're in 537. You come and see us. Either before the game, a quick hi at halftime, or after the game, we'll all meet up somewhere to take some pictures and post them online. Outside of that, if you don't already follow me today and today only, I'm not going to tell you how to follow me.
How about that? Well, I kind of threw up the graphics, so I didn't help you out a whole lot there, Bob. But
yeah, you
nonetheless, you guys definitely link up with Bob if you can. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at BT Boylan. We'll talk about it next week, but same goes for me. If you guys are coming to Charlotte, definitely give me a buzz. But go see Bob Rose today. And if you guys are going to the Dome, you guys have a safe time. In a fun time, and we will see you guys next Wednesday on the Bayou Blitz. As always, find peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll see you next week.